Bugattis are created to be forever. Pour l'éternité, as we like to say. When I was faced with the challenge of what to do next, it was not obvious at all.
Two companies, it's Bugatti Rimac and Rimac Technology. And now I just appointed finally a CEO for Rimac Technology, so.
For nearly 3 decades, Volkswagen turned Bugatti into the most extreme hypercar empire the world had ever seen. Cars like the Veyron and Chiron became symbols of engineering without limits. But while Germany was perfecting massive combustion engines, a young Croatian engineer named Mate Rimac was quietly building electric supercars in his garage using a broken BMW.
Here is the front of a Bugatti Chiron Persport, and here is the rear half, and today we've got to connect both of them together.
Years later, that same engineer would rise to control Bugatti's future, while Porsche and Volkswagen slowly stepped away from the brand they spent billions creating. So how did this happen? How did a garage startup from Croatia end up taking over one of the most legendary names in automotive history? In today's video, let's break down the complete story. The empire Volkswagen built. To understand what Volkswagen just gave up, you have to go back to 1998, a year when Bugatti was little more than a beautiful ghost. The original company, founded by Ettore Bugatti in 1909, had gone bankrupt decades earlier. 2 failed revival attempts had come and gone, the most recent collapsing into Italian receivership. The name was legendary, the brand was dead. And then Ferdinand Piëch, the cold-eyed engineering genius running Volkswagen, decided to buy it anyway. It was a gamble most boardrooms would have laughed out of the room. There was no factory, no engineers, no customers, just a name on paper and a century of myth. But Piëch did not care. He wanted Volkswagen to build the most extreme car the world had ever seen, and he had a number burned into his mind: 1,000 horsepower, 400 kilometers per hour, production ready, daily drivable, comfortable enough to take to dinner.
Even decades after it left the market, the Volkswagen Beetle remains to many people the quintessential Wolfsburg model.
The engineers told him it was impossible. He told them to do it anyway. What followed was almost a decade of obsessive, almost religious engineering. Volkswagen poured hundreds of millions of euros into the project. They built a new factory in Molsheim, France, the original spiritual home of Bugatti, restoring the old Chateau Saint-Jean as the company's headquarters. They handpicked a tiny team of specialists. They built test mules that caught fire, suspension systems that shredded themselves, transmissions that exploded under load. They started over again and again and again. And then, in 2005, the Bugatti Veyron arrived. It changed everything. 1,001 horsepower from a 16-cylinder, quad-turbocharged monster.
The Bugatti Veyron, the Concorde of the road. The meeting point for the most amazing collection of numbers. £1 million, 1,000 horsepower, and a top speed.
An engine layout no one else in the world had ever attempted in a production car. Over 400 kilometers per hour at full throttle. A fuel burn at top speed so extreme that the tank would drain in under 15 minutes. Tires that needed replacing after just a few full-speed runs. It was financially absurd. Volkswagen reportedly lost money on every single Veyron they sold. And they did not care, because the Veyron made Bugatti the most talked-about name in the automotive world. For nearly a decade, no one came close. Koenigsegg tried, Pagani tried, Hennessy tried. They were all chasing a target the Germans had set with their wallets wide open. Then came the Chiron in 2016. 1,500 horsepower, even more refinement.
The Chiron is the first production supersports cars in the world that delivers sensational 1,500 horsepower and a maximum torque.
A 420 km/h brick of speed and luxury, limited to 500 units. Each one sold for around $3 million. Every single one spoken for before production even ended. Bugatti had become a symbol, not just of speed, but of German precision, dominating a French legend with the kind of resources no boutique manufacturer could ever dream of matching. By 2020, Bugatti was the crown jewel of the Volkswagen Group. The 16-cylinder engine had become the holy relic of the hypercar world. Molsheim was a pilgrimage site for billionaires. The brand was, in many ways, untouchable. But inside Wolfsburg, something was already shifting. The world was turning electric. Tesla was rewriting the rules of what a fast car could be.
It was all very Tesla. A flashy, splashy launch for its latest and fastest ever model on Thursday evening.
Regulators in Europe were closing in on internal combustion. And Volkswagen, the very company that had spent more than 2 decades pushing the limits of combustion engineering, was now being told, by its own shareholders, by its own government, by the laws of physics, that the 16-cylinder had no future. A king was sitting on the throne. The throne was made of fossil fuels, and the ground beneath it was already beginning to crack. The Croatian boy who challenged Bugatti, while Volkswagen Group was spending hundreds of millions engineering the Bugatti Veyron. A teenager in a small Croatian town was standing in a freezing garage beside a broken 1984 BMW E30. His name was Mate Rimac, and the car that had taught him how to race had just destroyed its combustion engine during competition. Most young enthusiasts would have replaced the motor and moved on. Rimac made a different decision, one that sounded absurd at the time. Around 2007, when electric performance cars barely existed outside experimental prototypes, he decided to convert the BMW into an electric race car. There were no proven kits.
I converted this BMW in my garage into an electric car, and I started to compete. I went on races.
No established aftermarket. Tesla had only just launched the original Roadster, and electric cars were still treated like engineering curiosities in most performance circles. So Rimac built what he needed himself. He studied battery chemistry, designed systems from scratch, experimented with motors, and pieced together components in a country with virtually no modern automotive industry infrastructure. People laughed at him. Local mechanics mocked the strange whining sound of the early prototypes and nicknamed the project the washing machine. But the BMW, eventually called the Green Monster, kept evolving. Soon it was producing astonishing acceleration numbers. Then it started breaking internationally recognized electric vehicle performance records. In 2009, at just 21 years old, Mate Rimac officially founded Rimac Automobili.
I'm Mate Rimac, founder and CEO of Rimac Automobili.
His breakthrough came 2 years later at the Frankfurt Motor Show, where his tiny company unveiled the Rimac Concept 1, a fully electric hypercar producing over 1,200 horsepower, with acceleration figures that rivaled or surpassed many combustion-powered exotics. Much of the automotive world viewed it as an ambitious novelty, but they misunderstood what Rimac was actually building. He was never just creating cars. Behind the dramatic bodywork, Rimac was quietly developing the technologies that the entire automotive industry would soon desperately need.
Over the past 8 years, the goal has shifted. It started with a dream to make my own car, and now we consider ourselves as a technology company pushing the limits of electric vehicles.
Battery systems, electric motors, software integration, and high-voltage architectures. While Bugatti focused on mechanical theater and handcrafted luxury, Rimac focused on the future of propulsion itself. By the mid-2010s, major manufacturers had begun to notice. Aston Martin, Pininfarina, Koenigsegg Automotive, and Hyundai Motor Company all sought partnerships with Rimac. The once depisted garage project had become a supplier of advanced electric technology for some of the world's most elite performance brands. Then came the turning point. Porsche quietly acquired a stake in Rimac, then increased it. The young Croatian engineer who once rebuilt a broken BMW in a garage had become a strategic partner of the same automotive empire that controlled Bugatti. What began as an experiment in a small workshop was slowly evolving into something much larger, a transfer of influence inside the future of the hypercar industry itself. Deal that changed Bugatti forever. By the early 2020s, Volkswagen Group faced a problem it could barely admit publicly. Bugatti remained one of the most iconic names in automotive history. The brand made little financial sense in a rapidly changing industry. The Bugatti Veyron and Bugatti Chiron had become engineering legends,
This is a Bugatti Chiron, and it is currently the fastest production car you can buy. It'll do 261 miles per hour. It's also the most powerful production car.
Yet, maintaining 16-cylinder hypercars in an era of tightening emissions regulations and accelerating electrification looked increasingly unsustainable. Volkswagen needed a solution, but not just any solution. Bugatti could not simply be auctioned off to the highest bidder. The brand carried too much symbolic weight. Whoever inherited it needed technical credibility, a vision for electrification, and enough respect for the marque to preserve its identity rather than dilute it. There was really only one serious candidate, Mate Rimac. In November 2021, after months of negotiations between Rimac and Porsche leadership under Oliver Blume, the new joint venture was announced. Bugatti Rimac. Rimac Group would hold 55% ownership. Porsche AG would retain 45%. The headquarters would be located in Zagreb, Croatia, and Mate Rimac would become chief executive. That moment looked polite and collaborative from the outside. Executives praised heritage, innovation, and partnership. Photographs showed handshakes and construction updates at the massive new Rimac campus near Zagreb. But beneath the diplomacy, the center of gravity had already shifted. For the first time in modern Bugatti history, strategic decisions were no longer primarily flowing from Germany, and long-term product planning increasingly moved under Croatian leadership. Porsche still held influence, but operational momentum now belonged to Rimac. Mate Rimac wasted little time redefining Bugatti's future. The legendary quad-turbocharged W16 engine had reached the end of its practical life.
While it's true that the 8-litre quad-turbo W16 engine gains 50% more power, this is way more than a tune-up job.
Emissions pressures and technological realities made a purely combustion-powered future impossible. What Bugatti needed was a bridge between its analog identity and an electric future. That bridge arrived in June 2024 with the Bugatti Tourbillon. Powered by a new naturally aspirated 8.3-liter V16 developed alongside Cosworth and paired with 3 electric motors, limited to just 250 units and priced around $4 million. Every car was effectively spoken for before production began. But the Tourbillon mattered for a deeper reason. It signaled that Bugatti's future was no longer fundamentally a Volkswagen project. The architecture, electrification systems, and engineering philosophy all carried Rimac's fingerprints. The 2021 partnership had quietly evolved into something much larger, a transfer of identity. And inside Porsche, some executives were beginning to understand an uncomfortable truth. They were no longer the ones shaping Bugatti's future. Why Volkswagen really walked away. What happened to Bugatti in 2026 cannot be understood without understanding what happened to Porsche first. Because behind the elegant press releases and polite executive statements was a financial shock so severe that it forced one of the most powerful automotive companies in the world into survival mode. Between 2024 and 2025, Porsche AG suffered a collapse that stunned the industry. Operating profit fell from 5.64 billion euros.
At German carmaker Porsche plunged by nearly 96% in the first 9 months of this year.
To just 410 million euros in a single year. A staggering 93% decline. Not a slowdown, not a weak quarter, a collapse. The kind of number that changes boardroom conversations overnight. The causes had been building for years. Then they arrived all at once. China was the first blow. For more than a decade, Porsche had thrived in the Chinese luxury market, where the badge represented status, wealth, and Western engineering prestige. But consumer behavior changed faster than Stuttgart expected. Chinese buyers increasingly turned toward domestic electric brands that were cheaper, faster, and loaded with technology tailored to local tastes. Porsche's dominance eroded rapidly, and one of its most important profit engines suddenly weakened. The second pressure point was electrification itself. Porsche had invested heavily in its electric future, from the Porsche Taycan to the electric Macan and future EV platforms. But the premium EV market cooled. Charging infrastructure lagged behind expectations. Resale values became volatile. Buyers hesitated. The spending had already happened, but the returns were slower and smaller than projected. And surrounding all of this was the broader crisis inside Volkswagen Group. Profit margins tightened. Factory closures were discussed. Layoffs became real. Political pressure mounted. Unions pushed back. In that environment, every asset was scrutinized, including Bugatti Rimac. Internally, the uncomfortable question became unavoidable. Operational control already belonged to Mate Rimac. The engineering direction was set. Porsche's influence had become increasingly symbolic, while valuable capital remained tied up in assets that offered limited short-term relief to Porsche's struggling core business.
It also slashed its profitability outlook for this year. It's further signs of trouble for the company, whose profits were nearly wiped out completely in the second quarter.
So the decision was made quietly. Porsche would sell everything. Not because Volkswagen stopped believing in Bugatti, but because it no longer had the financial room to keep holding it. That distinction matters. It was a balance sheet decision made during one of the most financially turbulent periods Porsche had faced in decades. And waiting on the other side of that decision was Mate Rimac, alongside a New York investment consortium prepared to take control of the future Porsche could no longer afford to prioritize. For Volkswagen, it marked the quiet end of a 28-year era. For Mate Rimac, it was the culmination of a strategy built patiently over nearly a decade, until the moment finally arrived to inherit one of the most legendary names in automotive history. The silent takeover begins on April 24, 2026. The papers were signed, and with almost no public drama, one of the most important ownership shifts in automotive history quietly began. Porsche announced it would sell its entire 45% stake in Bugatti Rimac, along with its 20.6% stake in Rimac Group, to a consortium led by New York-based HOF Capital. Alongside HOF stood Blue 5 Capital and a network of institutional investors from the United States and Europe. The financial details remained private. Regulatory approval still stood ahead, but the direction of the industry had already changed. Because this was never simply about Porsche leaving Bugatti. The headlines often framed the moment: the brilliant Croatian engineer who rose from modifying an old BMW in a garage to leading one of the most technologically advanced hypercar companies in the world. But reality is more complicated than mythology. Rimac is not taking over Bugatti alone. After the deal closes, Rimac Group will gain full operational control of Bugatti Rimac, while HOF Capital becomes one of the most powerful forces inside the company itself. Under the ownership of Volkswagen Group, Bugatti was treated almost like an engineering monument, a project built to prove what was technically possible. Cars like the Bugatti Veyron and Bugatti Chiron.
Bugatti Chiron.
This is the Chiron, Bugatti's €2.4 million successor to the Veyron hypercar.
Were irrational by design. Machines created to chase speed records, impossible craftsmanship, and prestige without worrying too much about profit margins. Volkswagen thought in decades, in factories, in heritage. Investment firms think differently. HOF Capital and its partners will expect growth, combined with Rimac's obsession with electric performance and advanced technology. The result may be a Bugatti that moves faster, expands wider, and behaves less like a sacred automotive relic and more like a modern luxury technology company. And the long-term shift toward electrification no longer feels hypothetical. It feels unavoidable. But that future carries enormous danger. Bugatti's power has always come from scarcity and mystique. The brand survives because it feels untouchable, almost mythical. Expand too aggressively, and the legend dissolves into another premium badge competing for attention. Stay too conservative, and investors begin demanding faster returns. Mate Rimac now sits directly between those forces, protecting the soul of a French icon while answering to the expectations of international finance. That may be the hardest balancing act in the automotive world. And yet the transition happened with remarkable silence. No corporate war, no public outrage, just carefully worded press releases and polite executive statements. Porsche thanked Rimac. Executives discussed strategic focus. The industry moved on. But history may not, because what ended in 2026 was not merely a partnership. It was the conclusion of a 28-year experiment in which Germany resurrected a dead French marque and turned it into the world's most extreme hypercar brand. What begins now is something entirely different. A Bugatti shaped by Croatian engineering, American capital, global markets, and a generation of buyers who care less about nationality than exclusivity. The next chapter will not be decided by speeches. It will be decided by the cars themselves, and by whether Mate Rimac can preserve the soul of Bugatti while everyone else at the table is counting the numbers. For nearly 3 decades, Volkswagen turned Bugatti from a dead French legend into the world's ultimate hypercar empire. The Veyron and Chiron proved what unlimited engineering and money could achieve. But as the world shifted toward electrification, the 16-cylinder dream began running out of time. Quietly, control passed to Mate Rimac, the Croatian engineer who started by converting a broken BMW into an electric race car in his garage. Backed by global investors, Rimac now leads Bugatti into a future Volkswagen could no longer afford to chase. The question is no longer who builds the fastest car. The question is whether Bugatti can survive becoming something entirely new. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the world of cars.